You don't like to be hurt, do you?
Oh, I don't know. Kind of fun sometimes.
God doesn't like me enough to let me die, so I'll try my blood pressure sky fucking high. Palpitations will increase. My anxiety is my masterpiece, broken down and chilled to the bone. Hopeless, worthless, all alone. Gonna pop tramadol and stay awake. Won't give up until I hallucinate.
Beg and plead on broken knees. You can bleed, but doom and gloom will save your soul.
Ripping out your broken teeth. You can scream, but
Doom and gloom will save your soul.
self-care means nothing. Had a heart attack and I'm still smoking. In through the lungs and out through the nose. Cardiac arrest part 2, here we go.
Beg and plead on broken knees.
A common question asked of me in my career is, what is the worst thing you've seen? Or some variation of that. What's the worst thing you know of, etc., etc. Among everything, though, and I mean everything I've seen or read about, there is one case that truly haunts me. It makes me feel shit. The murder of Junko Furuta. Her crudely named concrete encased high school girl murder case was infamous in Japan. It became infamous worldwide when the story broke of her tragic abduction, torture, and murder. The case is often regarded as the single worst case of torture inflicted on an individual in modern history. Junko Furuta was born in Misato, Saitama, Japan in 1971, and had an incredible work ethic. It was notably bright, and was known for really staying out of trouble. However, she was far from a shut-in and was quite popular in her school. She was admired by many of her peers, some of which admired her for all the wrong reasons, like Hiroshi Miyano. Miyano had a reputation in high school as a bully, and a bit beyond that for his connections to the Yakuza. The Yakuza, still to this day, has a very real presence in Japan, and they were even more present in the 1980s, and very much feared. So much so, that most people at the mention of this by Miyano would simply comply with just about anything he wanted. This of course gave him a sense of power, as he could intimidate most people, including girls, into doing whatever it is he desired. Junko was known as a beautiful and hardworking girl. She was a full-time student and at 17 years old worked a part-time job at a plastic molding factory during after-school hours. And by November of 1988, she had accepted yet another job at an electronics retailer where she planned to begin working after graduation. Her plans were to save up for a graduation trip she was planning, and in the future, she dreamed of becoming an idol singer, a type of singer and entertainer marketed for their personality, beauty, and charm. Baby metal is among the most well-known as of right now. Junko had a good life ahead of her, and was a straight-A student with very little absences. She did not do drugs, smoke, or drink, and had great aspirations for her future, all of which would be stolen from her in the most horrific way imaginable. Hiroshi Miyano was not just a big mouth about his supposed Yakuza connections. He also had a rather disgusting criminal history himself, and no hopes for the future. He and his friends were a group of gang rapists, which is a very real problem in Japan. He was living with his girlfriend and working as a tile worker for menial pay, according to her at least. in hopes to marry her. Miyano at some point escalated his deviant behavior to aspiring to become part of the world of organized crime. However, rather than profiting from crime, most of Miyano's criminal activity would be sex crimes. This caused his girlfriend to break off the relationship. Hiroshi Miyano would then attempt to ask Junko out. She turned him down. Rejected, this set Miyano off, and he obsessed over the incident. And on November 25th of 1988, Miyano and his friend and frequent accomplice, Shinji Minato, were wandering around Misata with the intentions of robbing and raping local women. Junko Furuta was getting off work around 8:30 p.m. Coincidentally, or perhaps by Miyano's knowledge of her schedule, the pair were lurking around at the time, and Miyano concocted a plan as Junko rode home on her bike. Minato would attack Junko, then Hiroshi Miyano would interfere, scaring him off. The pair agreed on this, and Junko was attacked and knocked off her bike. Minato then fled the scene. Miyano then entered and attempted to convince Junko to let him accompany her home safely, under the pretense that he had witnessed the attack. Junko agreed to this for whatever reason, and was unknowingly led to a nearby warehouse. There, Miyano threatened her, and claimed that he had his connections with the Yakuza, and that she would be killed if she refused or tried to report him to the police. So he raped her there. He then booked a cheap hotel nearby and raped her again. And at around 3 a.m., he took Junko to a park where Minato and 2 other rapists were waiting, Joe Ogura and Yosushi Watanabe. There, Miyano would begin to brag about raping Junko to the others, as they rummaged through her backpack, finding a notebook with her home address written inside. They told Junko that the Yakuza will know where she lives now, and if she tries to escape, they will kill her and her whole family. They then overpowered Junko and took her to the home of Minato's parents. This would be the last time Junko Furuta would see the outdoors, or have any further glimpse of hope. The gang recently had kidnapped another girl, raped, and then released her. They discussed keeping Junko in captivity to further rape and sell to other men in the area. 2 days later, on November 27th, 1988, concerned about the whereabouts of their daughter, Junko's parents contacted the police and reported her missing. When news of this broke, Miyano and his accomplices wanted to make sure no one would come looking for her. So they forced her to call her own mother 3 different times to convince her that she had run away and she was not in any danger. They also made her call the police and stop the investigation into her whereabouts. And by the following day, no one would be looking for Junko Furuta. During the time she was being held captive, she was beaten and raped and tortured daily. When Minato's parents were present, she was to pretend she was his girlfriend. And by the evening of the 28th, Miyano invited 2 other boys over to his house, Tetsuya Nakamura and Koichi Ihara. They were drinking cough syrup, pretending it was hard drugs and goofing off, acting high. This is when Junko attempted to escape, screaming in fear as Minato's parents were asleep. Miyano tripped her, grabbing her by her legs. Then Ihara began smothering her with a pillow. Shinji Minato dismissed his parents, who were awoken by the screaming. Junko then slipped in and out of consciousness, being suffocated, and the group gang raped her once more. This was only the beginning of her suffering. Her physical ruin and mental anguish would be so severe and slow as near escapes would be grievously punished, and hope extinguished as a result. It is believed one of the boys from the night on the 28th had told his brother what he saw at Minato's house, and of the abuse of Junko he had witnessed. Whether or not he told his brother that he participated, well, I guess that's irrelevant, I suppose. The brother then told his parents, who contacted the police, who did in fact show up to the Minato residence, but were assured by Minato's parents that no girl was inside the home. For unknown reasons, the police did not investigate the inquiry further, and they never returned to the home. It is believed that Junko was well aware of this, and was powerless in her captivity, so she could not be saved then. When the boys were not taking turns raping Junko, they would also force her to masturbate in front of them, and making her entertain them in other grotesque ways, like eating live cockroaches they found in Minato's room, then chasing them with her own urine. At this point, the abuse would escalate further and further. They began to hang Junko from the ceiling so they could use her as a literal punching bag or a piñata. They beat her with golf clubs, iron rods, bamboo sticks, and despite this chaos in small quarters, Minato's parents would live in alarming ignorance of the hell that was being evoked in their home. It's widely believed their fear of the Yakuza was the cause of this, but even still, the sheer sadism and acts of barbarity that occurred in the home would become one of the worst acts of torture inflicted upon a single human in modern history. After time, malnourishment and dehydration would severely weaken Junko physically and mentally. Combining these factors with the trauma of near constant physical torture and rape would begin to break Junko completely. By the 7th day, she was raped, including gang raping, more than 100 times, and she was kept entirely naked almost exclusively, and starving, surviving on old milk, liquor, and cockroaches for a time, occasionally receiving scraps from the boys as well. And as the cold of the Japanese winter swept in, she was made to sleep naked on the balcony as temperatures dropped below zero. Other times they would beat and rape her, then force her to sit for hours at a time in a freezer. And at one point, on her 9th day in captivity, the group was eating skewers of grilled chicken when they decided to shove them inside Junko's vagina and rectum, causing severe bleeding. And on this day, she would attempt another escape. Junko snuck to the phone with as much haste as her weakened body could muster, and managed to call the police. However, before she could even speak, she was stopped by Miyano, who then dismissed the police when they had called back. Despite multiple disturbances and heavy suspicion at the Minato residence, this would be the final time the police would be reached or contacted from the home. They never investigated any further. As punishment for trying to escape, Junko was bound and tormented by Miyano, who taunted her with a candle flame and dripping wax. He did this for some time before Junko's legs were then doused in lighter fluid and set on fire. The shock from the pain and the burning sent her into convulsions. When the group thought she was faking a seizure, they opted to set her feet and legs on fire again. Junko survived this, but passed out from the trauma. The group would once again take turns raping her after this. As days passed, the gang would regularly pimp out Junko's malnourished and abused body to local gang members and other people they knew, in addition to continuously raping and beating her themselves, which now included regularly tying her hands to the ceiling to use her as a literal punching bag. One instance where they did this resulted in damage to Junko's internal organs, so bad that blood ran from her mouth, filling her nose with so much blood that she could not breathe through it. The scraps of food would slowly stop being given to Junko as well, and she was made to drink her own urine repeatedly and continue eating cockroaches, sometimes also for their own entertainment. They also found great pleasure in her terror when they continued to set her legs on fire, causing a great deal of infection to build. Minato's parents continued to ignore the abuse and pretended Junko was not in the home. It is said that they not only feared Miyano because of the Yakuza, but their own son, Minato, because he became increasingly violent towards them. Minato also had a brother and a sister, the sister being the girl Miyano was dating before they kidnapped Junko. Still, no one in the home would report what was happening. Due to the malnourishment and severe burns and bruised muscles in her legs, Junko was unable to walk by day 20 of her captivity. As the abuse continued, her hands and feet were so damaged and broken, it would take Junko over an hour to crawl downstairs to the bathroom to void herself of infected blood-filled urine. Eventually, the damage was so severe to her body, she could not make it to the bathroom at all, and she lost control of her bladder and bowels frequently, and was subsequently beaten for messing up the carpet in the home. Around this time is when her body began to shut down, albeit slowly. She was unable to drink water or consume food at this point, due to internal damage. It would vomit after each attempt, which kept her dehydrated. The vomiting also prompted the group to beat her. On the 26th day, Junko would endure one of the worst nights of torture. The group beat her countless times that day, and even jumped on her face and inserted foreign objects inside of her vagina and rectum once more. This included a bottle, lit cigarettes, an iron bar, and scissors. At one point during this abuse, someone got an idea, and they restrained Junko and inserted a still hot light bulb into her vagina. The group took turns punching her abdomen until it exploded inside of her. They then continued to burn her with cigarette lighters and set off fireworks in her ears, rupturing her eardrums. They grew angry when she couldn't hear them properly after this and proceeded to set off fireworks inside of her anus and vagina, as well as her mouth. On multiple occasions, they would force Junko to ingest toxic amounts of alcohol, and even inhale paint thinner and smoke multiple cigarettes at one time. And by the end of December, she was unable to walk at all. She was confined to the floor in Minato's room, emaciated and broken. This did not stop the group from raping her continuously and charging others to do so as well. Multiple teenage boys would rape her at once and come from nearby schools to do so. Businessmen in the Yakuza would also partake, and at one point Junko was raped by over 12 people in a single day. Due to the constant torture and trauma, her physical appearance began to change dramatically. Her face became so swollen it was difficult to make out features. Her body was so crippled, she could not move, and she eventually gave off a rotting smell due to her infected wounds and severe injuries. This caused the group to lose interest in her sexually as the smell got so bad. And as a result, they would go and kidnap and gang rape another girl, an unknown 19-year-old, who also did not identify the group at the time. It is also not clear whether she was also brought back to the Minato residence or not. Junko would spend her time in between being tortured by staring blankly at her surroundings, awaiting the next rape, the next burning, the next thing to be clipped off or cut. Due to the severe trauma inflicted upon her body, by day 30, she was unable to urinate or have a bowel movement at all. The group would then begin to pierce sewing needles through her nipples, before eventually just ripping her left one off with a pair of pliers. And while the direct rape slowed down, the sexual assaults with foreign objects did not, and the abuse grew more and more severe by the day. They would drip hot candle wax onto her eyelids and face, and burn her there as well as her genitals with cigarette lighters. And at one point, they began to drop weights onto her fingers, shattering them along with her fingernails. And by January 1st of 1989, Junko was held captive for 38 consecutive days. and not a single day held reprieve for her yet. She spent New Year's Day wishing for death and was left alone for the first time since her captivity, but was unable to scream, move, or comfort her broken and bleeding body in any way. She spent much of her time begging her captors to finally kill her, to free her from her hell. Of course, they welcomed her agony and rewarded it with more abuse. But her suffering was nearly at an end. January 4th, 1989. The group challenged Junko Furuta to a game of mahjong. She had no choice but to comply, and was propped up like a corpse as she struggled to play the game. However, despite 40 days of torture, rape, beatings and despair, shattered bones and spirit, and a shrunken brain, Junko Furuta won the game. This sent Miyano into a frenzy. The group began to beat her once again, striking her feet with a stick, and eventually beat her until she collapsed onto a stereo set and went into convulsions. She was bleeding profusely, and pus exploded from her infected burns. The group taped her hands in plastic bags and continued to beat her in hopes that would control some of the bleeding. They dropped a heavy dumbbell on her stomach multiple times. Then finally they poured lighter fluid all over her body, and once again lit her on fire. She allegedly made some attempts to put out the fire in desperation, but due to her broken shell of a body, she quickly became unresponsive, and the fire went out. The boys leaving her alone, where she finally succumbed to her injuries. She was in agony, alone when she died. It would be Minato's brother who would discover Junko's body. He then called Minato to inform him that he thinks that Junko died. Afraid of going to prison for murder, the group gathered at the home and wrapped Junko's corpse in blankets and shoved her emaciated body into a travel bag, where they transported the body to an unknown location and dumped it into a 55-gallon drum. They then filled the drum with wet concrete, then disposed of the drum into a lot of reclaimed land in Koto, Tokyo. Junko for a time became a memory. That is until January 23rd of 1989. Hiroshi Miyano and Joe Ogura were arrested for the gang rape of the 19-year-old woman they had kidnapped in December. And on March 29th, they were interrogated as a search on their homes turned up women's underwear at both homes. One officer led Miyano into believing the police were aware of a murder committed by him, and assuming Joe Ogura had already confessed to the crimes against Junko, Miyano then told the police where to find Junko's body. The police were confused, as they were referring to a murder of an entirely different woman and her 7-year-old son. This murder occurred 9 days prior to Junko Furuta's kidnapping, and still to this day, those murders remain unsolved. On March 30th of 1989, police went to the location of the drum where Junko's body was entombed, and found encased in concrete her body. It was so disfigured and broken, she was identified by fingerprints. An autopsy was performed, and it was confirmed that her brain had shrunk, and multiple small glass bottles were lodged inside of her anus. Junko was also found to be pregnant, despite severe damage to her uterus. The damage done to her body was unimaginable. Joe Ogura was then arrested on April 1st for a separate sexual assault and then re-arrested for Junko's murder case. The arrests of Yasushi Watanabe, Nobuharu Minato, and Shinji Minato followed. Originally, the names of the 4 main perpetrators were withheld by the courts because the criminals were, quote, juveniles. However, journalists from the Shuken Bunshin magazine figured out their names and published them with the statement reading, "With what they did to Junko Furuta, they do not deserve to have anyone uphold their human rights." Hiroshi Miyano was 18 years old at the time of the crime. He then changed his name to Hiroshi Yokoyama. Joe Ogura was 18 years old as well and changed his name to Joe Kamisaku. Shinji Minato was 16 years old at the time. Some sources state his name is Nobuharu, but that may be his brother's name. And Yasushi Watanabe was 17 years old. Junko Furuta was raped upwards of 500 times by over 100 men and boys, and only a few have been charged in connection to this vile crime. Tetsuya Nakamura and Koichi Aihara were also later charged for the rape, after their DNA was found on and inside Junko's body. Ihara confirmed during the trial that he was the one who informed his brother what was happening, and alleged he was bullied into raping Junko and never returned. The officers who were negligent to the call were publicly shamed and faced obvious backlash from the community. That was around day 16 of her captivity. If they would have searched the home, they could have possibly saved her. The trial that proceeded had a considerable amount of confusion and rage around it, due to the ages of the accused and possibly due to the Yakuza connections as well. The group were charged as minors, and their convictions were mediocre at best. 3 of the initial abusers were charged with less than 10 years in prison. Miyano got 17 years, which was bumped up to 20 after he tried to appeal his conviction. Some of the boys' parents even vandalized Junko's grave, calling her a whore and exclaiming she ruined their lives. The damage to Junko's body was unimaginable. Her mother fainted and needed to seek psychiatric therapy and inpatient care after finding out what had happened to her daughter. Junko Furuta's funeral was held on the 2nd of April of 1989. One of her friend's memorial address stated, "Junshan, welcome back. I have never imagined that we would see you again in this way. You must have been in so much pain, so much suffering. The happy we all made for the school festival looked really good on you. We will never forget you. I have heard that the principal has presented you with a graduation certificate. So we graduated together, all of us, Junshan. There is no more pain, no more suffering. Please rest in peace." Junko's intended future employer also presented her parents with the uniform she would have worn on the job, if she was able to accept it, which was placed in her casket. At her graduation, Furuta's school principal presented her with a high school diploma, which was given to her parents. Miyano's mother had to sell their family home and was made to pay allegedly $425,000 in US dollars in restitution to the family of Junko Furuta for her son's crimes. The area in which her body was discovered was later turned into a park called Wakasu Park. All of the initial 4 murderers were released from prison and continued to commit sex crimes and theft, entering in and out of the prison system. Minato's parents and brother were not charged. Furuta's parents were dismayed by the sentences received by their daughter's killers and won a civil suit against the parents of Nobuharu Minato, in whose home the crimes were committed. After his release, Minato moved in with his mother. However, in 2018, he was arrested again for attempted murder after beating a 32-year-old man with a metal rod and slashing at his throat with a knife. Yasushi Watanabe, who was originally sentenced to 3 to 4 years in prison, received an upgraded sentence of 5 to 7 years. He was 17 at the time of the murder. Joe Ogura served 8 years in a juvenile prison for his role in the crime before he was released in August of 1999. After his release, he took his family name, Kamisaku. He was adopted by a supporter of his. He is said to have boasted about his role in the kidnapping, rape, and torture of Furuta. In July of 2004, he was arrested for assaulting Takatoshi Isono, an acquaintance he thought his girlfriend may have been involved with. Ogura tracked Isono down, beat him, and shoved him into his truck. Ogura then drove Isono from Adachi to his mother's bar in Misato, where he allegedly beat Isono for 4 hours. During that time, Ogura repeatedly threatened to kill the man, telling them that he has killed before and he knew how to get away with it. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison for assault. and has since been released. Ogoro's mother is allegedly the one who vandalized Junko's grave, all on her own. Ogoro also depleted his father's saving account, which was intended to be paid as restitution to Junko's family, which he did intentionally. Multiple exploitations have been made of Junko's ordeal, including a manga, exploitation film, and more. Her current gravesite is unknown, but it is believed that it would be a popular site of pilgrimage today if it were public. But perhaps it's for the best. She could finally rest in peace. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for all your patience here on Patreon if you're watching there. And as you can see, I decided not to show my face in this commentary. Honestly, it's mostly because I've been very busy in real life and I look like doo-doo. This case is extremely difficult for me, and is one of the few that, like, just off reading it, when I did my initial video, I was taken back. Like, I literally had to take breaks. Like, it brought me to tears. It's bad. And doing this, especially during edit, was no different. It was a very difficult process, I would say, because of the severity of it. And it's really hard to adequately put that into perspective. I did my best, and I feel like I did it to where it would keep someone's eyes on the screen. And that is because it's like, this is something that people should know about. People should know about this case. People should know about the cases like Sylvia Likens and others that are similar, and more awareness needs to be brought to these things. And now, especially in the case of Junko Furuta, that, like, this is something that, like, where there was absolutely, like, no justice served. Say what you want, those sentences were beyond mediocre. And just for the people to continue to do the same things progressively throughout their lives is really disgusting. And to tie that in even further, there's so many people that victimized Junko that were never identified, caught, or even bring, you know, I mean, how could they? They can't verify. It's just they're going off of the confessions and what people know and what witnesses have said. Very few things unnerve me now, and that's not me just being edgy and bragging. It's just saying that whatever way you look at it, whether you are one of the people that thinks I'm a psychopath, or you're the kind of people that just, you know, think I'm desensitized or what have you, it's something that no matter what, no matter how many times I read about it, talk about it, it's like, it's always up there on, like, the near top of my list of worst shit I know about, because it's like, I can't even fathom this, how someone could survive this. And we can hail Junko as, you know, this martyr of, like, strength, and that's fine, that's a great way to remember her, but holy shit, just to understand the sheer pain that person went through, not to mention the psychological suffering and strain. Her body shut down. There was like 10 days of not even be able to have a bowel movement or anything, like, where you're just ruined and you're still being raped. Like, that is so fucking vile and terrifying. I can't even. I could not imagine. I could not imagine myself in that scenario, and I wouldn't wish that upon my worst enemy. The reason I made this video, and I know that's been a big question, is, oh, am I running out of ideas or something? No, it's literally just because I was not satisfied with my older video, and it's still one of my most viewed videos, alongside my Ronnie McNutt video, which, yes, I am working on a far more in-depth documentary, so to speak, on Ronnie McNutt. I would like to focus the narrative building up from his biography and stories we could tell about him and things we know about him, versus just sensationalizing his horrific death. But that will be discussed, of course, and, like, I've had his family members reach out to me, and it's been basically, I don't want to overpressure someone for something like that, information on something that bad, you know what I mean? And if there's something comes of it with that, where there's insight from his family, then there is. If there isn't, there isn't. But there's a lot of plans here for more in-depth documentary style videos, if that's your fancy. Of course, I'll have my normal kind of reaction kind of videos as well. Can't get past those short, sweet ones, but there's a lot more to come. But with this, just to conclude my thoughts on Junko Furuta, it's just, I don't feel justice was served adequately. And I keep seeing comments like, oh, they get doxxed and this happens. It's like, okay, well, if something were to, like, if justice were to actually be served, they would go through something similar to her, or be confined to maximum security prison or something the rest of their life, like isolation. because that's how they killed her. They isolated her from the world and ripped and stripped her away of hope. And that's fucking inhumane. Beyond the physical torture she went through. The thought of that despair on top of the physical anguish is the most haunting shit. I mean, it's at least among the most haunting things I can personally think of that I know of. So everybody has their own opinions, but for me, this is still the worst case, like the most, you know, that's considered true crime, like not a gore kind of video you react to or whatever, no mixtape. This is the worst true crime case I know of, at least in my personal opinion. I mean, I know there's plenty that contest it real hard, but I still feel like this is probably the worst. But thank you so much for joining me in this. And again, if you're watching this on Patreon, thank you so much. And also, odd question this time. I normally ask people to comment down below and maybe suggest something related to the topic. Well, this is a revisit of something that it's a big topic that I didn't do well before. So if there's other videos like that you feel I should revisit, please let me know below. I try not to prioritize those. I want to give you guys fresh content. But sometimes these kinds of things I feel just need to be put out there in the best narrative I can offer. And that's why this video was made. Again, thank you so much for your support, all of you. I would not be here if it wasn't for you all watching. I can't thank you enough. And yeah, that's it. If you somehow haven't subscribed already, please do. And check out the links in the descriptions. There's a beacons there that gives you all my links, and it'll even show you when I'm online on Twitch. I usually stream once a week, sometimes more, every Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But if you like this video, please like it. If you want to catch more early releases like this, check out the Patreon. Once again, thank you so much for watching.
Snuff films do not exist!
The Red Room is a live stream hosted on the dark web, where the chat pays to participate in the torture and suffering of another person until the inevitable climax where they're murdered.
Just got home from a shitty day of work. Open up door and I start to lurk. Pretty little thing, long blonde hair. Real fucking shame she's strapped to the chair. You should see the look in her eyes when they bring out all the knives. She's screaming that she'll get out alive, but I beg to watch her die. Money goes in, blood comes out, broadcasting live from the Red Room. Money goes in, blood comes out, they won't survive the Red Room. Money goes in, blood comes out, broadcasting live from the Red Room. Money goes in, blood comes out, they won't survive the Red Room.
Are you coming or what?
Excuse me. Excuse me. How is it in there? Be careful. Why is that? You could spend all your money in there.
Money goes in, blood comes out, broadcasting live from the Red Room. Money goes in, blood comes out, they won't survive the Red Room. Next up, Mr. John Doe, just a man with nowhere to go. Nails in his hands, nails in his feet. He'll be a corpse when he leaves that seat. Just a body that nobody mourns. When we're done, blow his lungs out his uniform. No remorse when I hear their cries. Watching death makes me feel alive. Money goes in, blood comes out, broadcasting live from the Red Room. Money goes in, blood comes out, they won't survive the Red Room. Money goes in, blood comes out, broadcast life from the red room. Money goes in, blood comes out. They won't survive the red room.
Of course, red rooms are just a myth, an internet urban legend. But then again, why is my credit card maxed out?